Hi, I'm Dr. Brennan Roach, and welcome to a virtual tour of the Holy Land. And today we are going to be going to Tel Hatzor in the northern parts of Israel as we continue our journey. Stay with us. We're going to see some great sights and we're going to hear some great biblical explanations as we go through the tour of the tour of the Holy Land. We are now at Hatzor. The oldest version of the Bible had a little palace where he could stop overnight. Whoever interprets the dream has incredible power. If you're going from Jerusalem to Jericho or vice versa, you stop somewhere here and rest overnight. Near the caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. This is actually a pagan type place. It's a very likely place where Peter preached his first sermon. Some very significant, important events happen at this location. Hi, I'm Dr. Brennan Roach, and this is a virtual tour of the Holy Land as we go from site to site, looking at the different places that's mentioned in the Bible. And we do a little bit of teaching of what the Bible is actually teaching and showing us. And so today we are going to a less well-known location, and that is the biblical site of Tel Hatzor. So Tel Hatzor is a very interesting, it's not particularly well-known, but it is the largest and most significant archaeological site in the whole of Israel. So it's pretty amazing. It was, at its time, it was the hub of agriculture, business, and trade. And it was a large, well-defended city. It was much larger than any other city that we know of in the Old Testament that has been found. Larger than Jerusalem, larger than Sodom, larger than all the cities of the plain, larger than Ai and Jericho, and it was a phenomenally large city. And sort of, we wonder why we don't have a little bit more understanding. We'll find out about why we don't hear a little bit about Tel Hatzor. It has a fantastic history, and Tel Hatzor is the place of the unimaginable. So let's review our journeys so far in this season. We've visited Caesarea Philippi, which was the place of the source. Then we climbed Mount Hermon, the place of the transformation. Then we visited Tel Dan, and we went to two sites in Tel Dan. We went to the place of control, which was the altar of the temple, and also in Tel Dan we went to the city gates, which was the place of meeting. So today we are going to be at Tel Dan, and we are going to be in the place of let's get back to where we are. We're going to be in the place of the unimaginable. So where are we? We're at Tel Hatzor, and let's go through our slide and let's have a little bit of an understanding as to where we are. This is our map of season 2. We started in Caesarea Philippi and Mount Hermon and Tel Dan, and you can see how they're all closely bunched. And now we make our way down south, and we are now at Tel Hatzor. You might find this with a slightly different spelling. I spell it Hatzor. Some people spell it Hazor. I just do that to remind myself that this is the Hebrew syllable that makes that sound, as in Hatzor, where it's not the English sound of Hazor. So it's got like a TS sound like cat, so Hatzor. So that reminds me as to how to pronounce it correctly. So we're making our way down past around the Hula Valley, which we're located in right there. So when are we? What's going on? When are we in this location? So the ancient city of Hatzor is the largest ancient site, and it was about 14 kilometers north of the Sea of Galilee. The Tel rises above the fertile plain that surrounds it, consists of two parts. The lower Tel, which is the larger part consisting of about 170 acres, and the upper Tel, which was always the controlling royal organizational part of the city, which is 30. So when are we? Hatzor was the largest Canaanite city in the Holy Land of the second millennium BC. It was a major fortified city from the 19th to the 13th centuries BC. So think about the time of Joshua's entry into the promised land. He makes his way north and he finds himself fighting the combined tribes of the northern tribes. Now, King Jabin led the northern tribes and fought against him. So he gathered a whole group of every tribe, every village, every person he could find because they were the largest and the most powerful and most influential. They'd seen what happened at Jericho and Ai, and now Joshua is heading up their way. So Joshua and Jabin meet for battle in a place near Hatzor called Merom. And all of the Canaanite tribes were destroyed in that battle, and Joshua prevailed against another story of tremendous odds as to what happened there. Canaan then burned the city of Hatzor. That's important for us to remember when we talk a little bit later, and killed King Jabin, and we see that in Joshua chapter 11. And the city of Hatzor was then re-established, repopulated by the Canaanites, and then 200 years later, it was destroyed again. And then we see it was by Deborah and Barak as they went to war in the time of the judges and reestablished control over certain parts of the promised land. And then they were destroyed again by Deborah and Barak. They were destroyed again. And then it was sort of like a smaller Israelite city for a period of time until King Solomon decreed it to be a royal city. And at that time, it became very significant and very large, like Megiddo and Gezer. And we'll be going to Megiddo later. And later biblical references, of course, being the northern tribes, it's eventually invaded and taken captive. All the inhabitants are taken captives by the Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser the third in 732 BC. So I was covering a long period of time, probably over 1,000 years, and then eventually it goes into decline, and people sort of moved in and inhabited the city, but it was in continual decline, nothing significant until what we call the Hellenistic period, which is sort of around the time of Alexander the Great and before the Romans. It was abandoned completely, and that's why we never hear of such an important, crucial city at any time in the New Testament. So I've got a bit of a longer video that I want to play of this site because it's quite a big site and so much there. So I want to actually have a look at, and we'll roll the videotape and we'll have a little bit of a look at that. So let's now go to our the gate as well. So that was a little bit longer, but hopefully you found that interesting today as we go through and we had a look. But I'm also going to give you a little bit of a close-up to some of the images that we see here. I love this image, and it's on the beginning of the video today. It's just a great image of the Tel, an aerial image. Again, you can see the mountain range of Mount Hermon in the backyard. You can see all around is an agricultural area, which is today. You can see the upper Tel there, and then sort of to the background of it, you can see the larger lower Tel, which is vacant and doesn't have any agriculture on it whatsoever. The next is another image of the same thing, just a slightly different image, and I thought I'd give you a couple of angles and a couple of perspectives. But again, you can see here how rich and green the actual architecture and the landscape is. Now we get a nice aerial view of the Solomonic city gates. Now, this was a 6-chamber defensive structure, and you have a look at that. You look down one side and you go, hang on, there's 1, 2, 3. Well, depending on how you're counting, or across to the other side, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4. Hang on, I thought you said 6. Well, see, the front one is square. So that is the guard tower at the front. The 2 fronts, guard tower, gate, and then you come in and you've got a chamber left and right, 1 chamber left and right, 2 chamber left and right, 3. So 6 chambers all together, and that's why. And this is identical. This is what's really fascinating, that it was almost to the millimeter identical in Megiddo and Giza, which is why we know that they're Solomonic structures, and these were the best preserved out of the ones that we found as far as the city gates were concerned. So very interesting, very nice image, and something that's very special for us to look at. Here's where the horses would have been. So this is thought to have been where the stables were. And this is one of the interesting things about this, is why would you have the horses actually inside the upper city? You would normally think you'd have horses outside. So probably there was horses outside, but this is probably Solomon's personal horses and personal chariots, as this is only maybe at best holding a dozen horses or something like that. Whereas these cities held hundreds of chariots and hundreds of horses and hundreds of soldiers, so they could respond to things very quickly. So there's probably down the lower city, if they were to excavate, I'm sure they would find more of these Solomonic stables. But these ones are in the upper Acropolis. So again, for the very elite, for the very special. So there's not a lot that's actually required. Now we're actually having a look in the next one, and this is an olive press. Now we could look at a lot of different images and things of olive presses. This is a really nice, they're all done a little bit different. This is a really nice reconstructed one. You can see the stick going out to provide leverage, and there's a stone under the stick, and then there's that dark grayish looking color is actually weave baskets. So probably 3, 4, 5 weave baskets, which are full of olives, so they can crush the olives. And then while they're crushing the olives, the oil runs out to the rim around the side, and there's a little hole at the front, and that's where all the oil runs out, and you collect that. So you have a first press, second press, third press, like we do now. And the first olive is the best. Sorry, the first presses of the best oil, and you put more and more pressure on, and they squeeze more and more out. This is a really important part of Gethsemane, and the olive press and the squeezing and the pressure that's under there. But why we've got the olive press being important here, because of the promise of God to give this town to the Israelites, including their vine fields and their olives and their olive presses. So it's really, really interesting. That's why they've got the olive press on display, because in Deuteronomy chapter 6, we have a great example of it. It speaks of the city having olives. Then the next image we want to look at, this image here that we got here is of what we call a 4-roomed or 4-chambered Israelite house. So it's a little bit hard to sort of distinguish. So you've got the 4 rooms right in front of you. The pillars at the back, don't worry about those pillars. That's actually the chariot stables there. So it just shows you how close the horses were to the actual some of the accommodations that were actually on the upper Acropolis. And we go to another there's so much interesting stuff here. So I hope you're finding it interesting. We go to the standing stones of Hatzor. Now, these were the gods that were represented locally in Hatzor. Now, they were on a bama or a altar, which for pagan gods, meaning a high place, which refers to a raised platform and altar for animals and other Canaanite sacrifices in the Canaanite religion. The high places, so these were found on the Canaanite level, okay? The high places and the temples around the Middle Late Bronze Ages, and they found lots of different articles in Canaanites, but these standing stones, especially, you can see a lion in one of at the front there, and that sort of represents the Egyptian gods, probably Ra. And also we find here that the Egyptian influence, if you have a look at the middle of the photo, there is two hands raised up to a sun image, which is a symbol of Ra. And then you go down a little bit and you see the figure of the lion, which again denotes Egyptian influences, because of course the lion was from Africa and wasn't native to this region. So the lion they're talking about in the Bible is a much smaller and different from the classical lion, African lion that we think of in Egypt. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff, a lot of information, a lot of finds. So let's slide on to give you a little bit of the history, a little bit of the background of what happened, as this was a Canaanite city. So the Canaanite city, the uncovered fortifications. Let me just grab a little drink. The uncovered fortifications, elaborate palaces, temples, and buildings, along with written documents and other finds, indicate that Hatzor's importance as a Canaanite city during the second millennial BC. It illuminates the biblical passage that describes Hatzor as the head of all the kingdoms in Joshua 11, verse 10. The flourishing city was destroyed by fire at the ends of the late Bronze Age around 1200 BC. And the destruction is mentioned in the Bible, emphasizing the destruction of Hatzor during the conquest of Canaan by Joshua. But as for those cities that stood in their strength, Israel burned none of them except for Hatzor, that Joshua did burn. Joshua chapter 11, verse 13. Later, Hatzor was rebuilt and inhabited again by the Canaanites. And then, so typical part of the story, of course, of the Old Testament is you've got the people being faithful to God. They defeat the people of the land. Then eventually the people of the land rise up against Israel. So this is all part of that pattern that's occurring. So they just go back into the city over a period of time, and they start to rebuild the city, rebuild the defensive structures again. So at this point, Deborah, which is fascinating. If you haven't read much about the Judge Deborah, go in and read it. Women, you're going to love the story, talking about her leadership as a prophet, but she's a leader, and the army won't go in a battle unless Deborah is there at the time. Just fantastic biblical account of what a person, a great woman of God, can do. So 200 years later, Deborah leads an attack against the king of Hatzor, and the army is ultimately defeated. So Hatzor is indirectly mentioned in the account of Deborah's wars in Judges 4 and the Song of Deborah in Judges 5, which deals directly with the battle in Jezreel Valley, but doesn't mention Hatzor by name, but it's universally agreed that it is the city of Hatzor. From this time on, Hatzor became an Israelite city. Okay, so it's been defeated. It was Canaanite, defeated once, repopulated, defeated a second time, and now the Israelites come in and they take control. And this is the point where there was a magnificent, great blessing of God, which was poured out upon the nation of Israel, which we'll talk about at the end. So hang around for that. So we've got the Israelite city was a small settlement for some 200 years after the destruction of the Canaanite Hatzor. Then by royal decree, King Solomon brought the city back to prominence, and it became what's known as one of the Solomonic royal cities. So we've got Jerusalem, we've got Giza, we've got Megiddo, and we've got Hatzor. So this Solomonic city in there and was founded on the Upper Tel, where all the other significant sites were, in the 10th century BC, during King Solomon's reign, as it was recounted in the Bible. So King Solomon raised up a labor force of people that would come in and build up these royal cities, these Solomonic cities. And they built a house of the Lord. They built the palace in Jerusalem. They built the Millo. They built the walls of Jerusalem. They built the temple. So just amazing construction, building these really significant fortified cities all the way throughout Israel. And each one of them had a very similar, particularly the three cities. Jerusalem is very confined by the topography, by the way it's already laid out. But the other three cities were built on a plan and a pattern that's actually got several of the elements that are very similar, being the gates and several in the palaces and several of the other things. It's just quite amazing how they had that architectural knowledge at that point in time. Now we start to shift off again, and as Israel starts to do, they start to drift away from God, and we start to see the role of the northern tribes again. And in the 9th century BC, during the rule of King Ahab, the Israelite Hatzor became a grand royal city. So the northern tribes, King Ahab made that his royal city. So the eastern part of and it was just down the road from Tel Dan, so they could go and worship there. It was at the center of agriculture. It was strategic. It was already built up by Solomon with great defenses, and you could see a long way around. So that's why it was really important, and that's why they continued. And King Ahab actually reinforced it more, and it said had 2-meter thick walls surrounding the entire city. So pretty amazing defensive structures. In the 8th century, though, as we know, if you've been following along with the story, the Assyrians come in, conquered by Tiglath-Pileser III in 732, as recorded in 2 Kings 15:29. The city's destroyed. The northern tribes are taken into captivity, and then traces of this destruction is found in the archaeological record, and it never regained its past glory. It remained a small settlement from that point in time, and eventually it was completely abandoned a couple of hundred years before the time of Jesus. We don't know exactly when, but it just got smaller and smaller and smaller. Parts got taken over by agriculture, etc., as it became a fairly insignificant city, which explains why we have never heard about this place in the Old Testament. So what can we learn from Hatzor? So Hatzor and it's what I call unimaginable blessing. The unimaginable blessing of Hatzor. So let's have a look. Let's read what the Bible says about Hatzor. The Lord, so this is Deuteronomy promising what's going to happen. They're outside the promised land. Moses is saying, boom, this is what's going to happen. The Lord your God will soon bring you into the land he swore to give you when he made you vow to your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Covenantal promise here. Okay, so this is a covenantal promise to the nation of Israel. It is a land with large and prosperous cities you did not build. The houses will be richly stocked with goods you did not produce. You will draw water, which is why I want to stop and show you that cistern. You will draw water from cisterns that you did not dig, and eat from vineyards and olive trees that you did not plant, which is why I showed you the olive press. When you have eaten your fill of the land, be careful, people. Do not forget the Lord who rescued you from the slavery of Egypt. You must fear the Lord your God and serve him. When you take an oath, you must use only his name. So this is really just an unimaginable blessing. What do I mean by that? Well, let's just think about it. Let's just get our heads around this for a moment. That cities are taken in conflict. They're normally taken by war or battle. Sometimes they're abandoned and they're destroyed. But when they're abandoned, people abandon them and they take everything with them. There's nothing of value left. There's not food. There's not riches. There's not gold. They might even destroy or burn down the city themselves. But the story of the ancient world is that cities are destroyed, but yet this one is not destroyed. In this case, the enemy was destroyed on a nearby battlefield. So they go out and fight on, even though they're in this incredibly well defendable city, they go out and they're completely destroyed. Then they're chased, and then they're followed to all the different surrounding regions, and that the whole army is completely wiped out. That all is left in the city is the women and the children who flee once they hear that the army of the Lord has been victorious. So it denotes the unimaginable blessing. That means something that is unwarranted and undeserved blessing that only comes from God. This is why it's a covenantal promise. You can't apply this promise to yourself, okay? So don't think you're going to be able to pray and believe for and apply this promise where God's going to give you a city that's well stocked and everything that you can imagine. We can't think about how this actually would be, because it's actually a collection or a series of miracles. It's not just a miracle. It's not like the New Testament talks about 100-fold return of a crop, which talks about a miraculous, but it's miracle upon miracle upon miracle upon miracle, which occurs in these sequence of events that is just phenomenal, which eventually results in this city being abandoned and all the riches and the wealth of the biggest and most wealthiest city of the region being handed over to the people of God. We can work hard and we can toil for what we've got, and we can even believe for miracle provisions. But this is on a scale that we cannot imagine. This is not even close to what the Bible calls 100-fold return, which is like a miraculous return. This is like 1,000,000-fold return, maybe 1,000,000,000-fold return. It's just such a large blessing. This is why I call it the unimaginable blessing. This is so large, so significant that it's just completely unimaginable. It's like, imagine that one of the wealthiest people in the world, one of those household names of the billionaires that we probably all know their names of, they're worth today, right? They're worth hundreds of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions. They're worth more than countries are worth in this world today. And they're quite often the persecutors of the church. And these people just go, you know what? I'm going to stop persecuting, and I'm going to give you all my wealth. Here it is, hundreds of billions of dollars. I'm just going to give it to you, and I'm going to walk away. I can't even imagine the circumstance where this would occur. This was what it like for the Israelites who entered Hatzor on the surrounding cities that they had taken. People had taken hundreds of years to build and were handed over to the people of God, maybe thousands of years to build, handed over to the people of God as a blessing. This is a provision that would take multiply miracles. We know in the New Testament it talks about the miracle, if we have enough faith, a mountain can be lifted and thrown in the sea. Well, this would be like if Mount Everest was thrown into the middle of the Pacific Ocean and suddenly became a tropical paradise. So it's just beyond our wildest dreams, our wildest expectations of what God can actually do. So that's why I call Tel Hatzor the place of the unimaginable blessings of God. Miracle upon miracle of what God is actually doing. So I'm excited by that. I'm excited by what God's done in the past. I'm excited by what God can do in my life and in your life in the future. So when we cannot think or imagine what God can do, God delivers the unimaginable blessing. That's why I like to call Hatzor the place of the unimaginable. I'm Dr. Brennan Roach, and this has been a virtual tour of the Holy Land. Join us next time as we go to the city of Mount Carmel and we talk about Elijah and the prophets of Baal. It's a great sight. We'll see the great views. We can just imagine what would happen there. The greatest spiritual battle of Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Be with us next time. I'm Dr. Brennan Roach, and this is a virtual tour of the Holy Land. God bless you.